The morning sun cast long shadows across the Paris Island training grounds as Staff Sergeant Thompson surveyed his latest batch of recruits, week 6 of boot camp, and they were finally starting to look like Marines instead of confused civilians who had stumbled off the bus 2 months ago. But today would be different. Today they had an observer, some gray-haired civilian contractor sitting in the bleachers with a clipboard and the kind of soft, unremarkable appearance that screamed Pentagon desk jockey. Thompson barely spared the man a glance as he barked his morning commands. Listen up, recruits. Today we're running advanced close-quarters combat scenarios. Real-world situations where your training either saves your life or gets you killed. The contractor, his name tag read J. Mitchell, looked to be in his late 50s, maybe early 60s. Thinning gray hair, reading glasses perched on his nose, wearing khaki pants and a polo shirt that had seen better days. He sat with the relaxed posture of someone who'd spent too many years in office chairs, occasionally scribbling notes on a yellow legal pad. Probably another efficiency expert, muttered Corporal Jackson under his breath as the recruits formed up for weapons inspection. Look at him, soft as butter. Bet he's never held anything more dangerous than a stapler. The other drill instructors shared knowing smirks. They'd seen dozens of these bureaucratic observers over the years, former military-turned-civilian contractors who traded their warrior ethos for comfortable government paychecks and climate-controlled offices. As the morning progressed through standard tactical drills, Mitchell continued his quiet observation. He watched the recruits stumble through room-clearing exercises, noted their fumbling with equipment transitions, and observed their communication breakdowns during coordinated movements. But there was something different about his attention. Not the detached analysis of a clipboard warrior, but the focused intensity of someone evaluating performance against standards that went far beyond basic competency. Before we continue this incredible story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to follow our channel, and hit that like button if stories like this inspire you. And if you or anyone in your family has served in the military, we'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Your stories matter to us. During the mid-morning break, Thompson overheard a conversation between 2 other drill instructors that perfectly captured the general sentiment. Another Pentagon analyst come to tell us how to do our jobs, complained Sergeant First Class Williams, nodding toward Mitchell, who was reviewing his notes while sipping coffee from a thermos. Look at those soft hands. Probably never been closer to combat than a Tom Clancy novel. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez joined the conversation, adding his own assessment. My money says he's some retired supply clerk who thinks watching war movies makes him a tactical expert. But if Thompson had been watching more carefully, he might have noticed things that didn't quite fit the stereotype. The way Mitchell's eyes constantly swept the training area, maintaining situational awareness even while writing. How he positioned himself with clear sight lines and easy access to exits. The fact that despite his relaxed posture, he never fully turned his back to any approach route. Small things, easily missed, but telling details for someone who knew what to look for. The morning's exercises continued with increasing complexity. Fire and movement drills, tactical reloads under pressure, coordinated team movements through urban terrain mock-ups. Through it all, Mitchell watched with an expression that seemed almost critical. Not of the recruits. They were performing exactly as expected for their stage of training. But something in his steady gaze suggested he was seeing fundamental flaws in the training methodology itself, gaps that could prove fatal in actual combat situations. As the recruits broke for lunch, Mitchell approached Thompson with a quiet observation that would be the first crack in the facade. Staff Sergeant, he said, his voice carrying a subtle authority that made Thompson automatically straighten. Your recruit in 3rd Squad, 2nd position Patterson, I think? He's got a flinch developing with his trigger pull. Might want to address it before it becomes muscle memory. Thompson bristled slightly. Contractors didn't usually offer tactical advice to Marine drill instructors, but something in Mitchell's tone suggested this wasn't amateur enthusiasm. This was professional assessment from someone who understood the life-or-death importance of proper marksmanship. The afternoon brought live-fire exercises and Mitchell moved closer to the action with a subtle shift in demeanor that only the most observant would have noticed. He positioned himself where he could observe not just the recruit's performance, but the entire tactical setup, sight lines, safety protocols, emergency procedures, and most tellingly, the gaps between what was being taught and what would actually keep these young Marines alive in combat. Staff Sergeant Thompson found himself stealing glances at the contractor throughout the afternoon. There was something about Mitchell's positioning that nagged at him, the way he naturally gravitated towards spots that offered both optimal observation and tactical advantage. When the recruits moved through their marksmanship drills, Mitchell's body language changed subtly. His breathing became more controlled, his stance unconsciously shifting to what Thompson recognized as a perfect shooting position. The man might look soft, but his muscle memory belonged to someone who'd spent serious time behind a rifle. During weapon malfunction drills, Recruit Patterson struggled with a double feed that had him flustered and sweating. The drill instructors were preparing to intervene when Mitchell's voice cut quietly across the range. "Patterson, tap, rack, assess. Don't fight the weapon. Let it tell you what's wrong." The recruit's head snapped up, and something in Mitchell's tone, calm, authoritative, patient, cut through his panic. Patterson followed the guidance and cleared the malfunction smoothly. Thompson made a mental note. Contractors didn't usually know immediate action procedures well enough to coach them under pressure. The most telling moment came during the tactical movement exercise. As the recruits advanced through a simulated urban environment, Mitchell began moving along the observation area in perfect synchronization with their progress. But he wasn't just following. He was mentally running the scenario himself, his positioning optimizing for fields of fire and cover positions that existed only in his tactical mind. When Recruit Williams made a critical error that exposed him to simulated enemy fire, Mitchell's hand moved involuntarily toward his hip, muscle memory reaching for a sidearm that hadn't been there for years. "Sir, you need to maintain your position behind the safety line," Corporal Jackson called out, his tone professionally respectful but firm. Mitchell nodded and stepped back, but not before Thompson caught something that made his blood run cold. In that brief moment when Jackson had issued his directive, Mitchell's entire body language had shifted. The soft contractor disappeared, replaced by someone who radiated the kind of control lethality that Thompson had only seen in a handful of elite warriors during his own deployments. As the afternoon exercises continued, Mitchell began offering subtle corrections that went far beyond basic military knowledge. When Recruit Martinez struggled with his tactical reload, Mitchell demonstrated the proper technique. With an imaginary weapon, his movement so fluid and practiced that several recruits stopped their own drills to watch. "Economy of motion," he explained quietly. "In combat, every wasted second is a potential death sentence. Smooth is fast, fast is lethal." The terminology wasn't standard Marine Corps doctrine. It was a language of special operations, spoken with the casual authority of someone who'd lived it. During the final exercise of the day, a complex coordinated assault on a fortified position, Mitchell's transformation became impossible to ignore. He wasn't just observing anymore. He was conducting his own tactical analysis, his eyes constantly scanning for threats the recruits were missing, his body positioning and hand signals unconsciously directing movements that only someone with extensive combat experience would recognize as necessary. Sergeant Williams nudged Thompson and whispered, "Look at our desk jockey now." Guy's running the assault in his head like he's done it 1,000 times before. Thompson was beginning to suspect that maybe Mitchell had done it 1,000 times before. When the exercise concluded, Mitchell approached him with another observation that sent chills down the drill instructor's spine. "Your fire teams are using textbook movements, but they're not adapting to terrain features that will be critical in actual combat," he said, pointing to specific positions on the training course. In Fallujah, approaches like that would have gotten them killed in the first 30 seconds. The casual reference to one of the Marine Corps' most intense urban combat experiences, delivered with the matter-of-fact tone of personal knowledge, made Thompson realize that Mitchell might be far more than anyone had assumed. As the day's training concluded, Mitchell packed his materials with the same quiet efficiency he'd displayed all week. But now Thompson was watching him differently, noting details that painted a picture far removed from the soft contractor stereotype. The way Mitchell moved through the training area, automatically checking that weapons were properly secured and safety protocols followed. How he positioned himself during conversations to maintain awareness of his surroundings. Most tellingly, how the recruits had begun responding to his quiet suggestions with the instinctive respect usually reserved for proven combat veterans. The next morning arrived with an unscheduled complication that would shatter every assumption about Jay Mitchell. Brigadier General Morrison had arrived for an impromptu inspection, bringing with him a demand to observe advanced tactical scenarios that showcased the full capabilities of modern Marine training. What should have been a routine demonstration quickly escalated into the most complex live-fire exercise the recruits had attempted, involving multiple fire teams, coordinated movement through urban terrain, and live ammunition, a combination that pushed both equipment and personnel to their operational limits. Mitchell took his usual position in the observation area, but today his demeanor carried a tension that hadn't been there before. His eyes moved constantly across the training setup, cataloging details that seemed to concern him. Ammunition counts that appeared excessive for scenario, safety protocols that hadn't been properly adjusted for the increased complexity, and most critically, a range safety officer who was clearly overwhelmed by managing too many moving parts simultaneously. He made several notes on his pad, then did something unprecedented. He approached Staff Sergeant Thompson directly. "Staff Sergeant," Mitchell said quietly, his voice carrying an undertone of urgency that made Thompson immediately focus. "This exercise is running outside normal safety parameters. Your ammunition allocation is 30% higher than standard protocol. Your safety officer is managing twice the normal number of moving elements, and you got multiple fire teams operating in overlapping sectors without proper deconfliction procedures." Thompson started to bristle at what sounded like criticism from a civilian, but something in Mitchell's tone, professional, concerned, authoritative, made him pause and actually consider the assessment. The exercise began with textbook precision. Fire Team Alpha advanced through the first building complex, while Bravo Team provided overwatch from elevated positions. The recruits had improved dramatically over their weeks of training, their movements more coordinated, their communication sharper, their weapons handling approaching professional standards. General Morrison nodded approvingly from his position in the command post, clearly impressed by the progress these young Marines were making under Parris Island's demanding training regimen. But Mitchell saw what the others missed. 23 minutes into the exercise, his worst fears began materializing. The mechanical target system, stressed beyond its design parameters by the complex scenario, began showing signs of malfunction. Targets were deploying out of sequence, creating confusion about engagement sectors. The range safety officer, overwhelmed by tracking multiple fire teams simultaneously, was losing situational awareness of critical safety zones. Most dangerously, the communication system was experiencing interference that was delaying critical commands and updates. When the catastrophic failure occurred, it happened with the terrifying speed that characterizes real combat situations. A hydraulic malfunction in the pop-up target system caused a full-size target to deploy directly in Fire Team Bravo's field of fire just as they were engaging targets downrange. Recruit Martinez, startled by the unexpected movement in his peripheral vision and operating on pure adrenaline, pivoted instinctively and fired a full burst directly into the movement corridor where Fire Team Alpha was advancing according to her tactical timeline. The sharp crack of live 5.56mm rounds echoed across the range, followed immediately by the range safety officer's panicked shouts of "Cease fire! Cease fire! Cease fire!" But the mechanical malfunction had created a cascade failure. The target system continued deploying targets randomly, creating a nightmare scenario where normal safety procedures were inadequate. 3 recruits from Alpha Team, Johnson, Patterson, and Williams, found themselves pinned down behind a concrete barrier that provided cover for Martinez's position, but left them exposed to the malfunctioning targets that continued popping up around them. The situation deteriorated rapidly. Johnson had taken a grazing wound to his leg, not immediately life-threatening, but serious enough to limit his mobility and causing blood loss that would become critical if not addressed quickly. The other 2 recruits, Patterson and Williams, were frozen by a combination of fear, adrenaline, and tactical confusion. They could hear their drill instructors shouting commands, but the mechanical failures and communication interference made it impossible to understand what they were supposed to do. Staff Sergeant Thompson and his fellow instructors found themselves facing every military trainer's worst nightmare, a training exercise that had become a genuine emergency requiring immediate life-saving action. Precious seconds ticked by as they struggled to establish communication with the trap recruits while simultaneously attempting to shut down the malfunctioning systems that were keeping them pinned down. The range control booth was reporting that the mechanical failures were escalating, with multiple systems showing critical errors. That's when Jay Mitchell stopped being a civilian contractor and became something else entirely. Mitchell didn't run toward the crisis. He transformed. In one fluid motion that defied his apparent age and soft appearance, he vaulted the safety barrier with the explosive grace of a predator unleashed. He hit the ground in a perfect combat roll that brought him into cover behind the nearest concrete barrier. His civilian clothes now irrelevant as his true nature revealed itself. Staff Sergeant Thompson started to shout a warning, but the words died in his throat as he watched the metamorphosis of the man they dismissed as a desk-bound bureaucrat. Martinez, shift fire 30 degrees right and hold. Mitchell's voice cut through the chaos with the kind of command presence that bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to military training. The panicked recruit responded instantly, his finger coming off the trigger as he redirected his weapon away from his trapped teammates. But Mitchell was already moving again, using the momentary lull to cover ground with a kind of tactical movement that spoke of decades of experience in genuinely life-threatening situations. He sprinted across 20 yards of open ground in a zigzag pattern that kept him below the line of sight of the malfunctioning targets while maintaining cover for Martinez's position. His movement was economical, purposeful, each step calculated to minimize exposure while maximizing speed. When he reached the pinned-down recruits, he didn't slide into their position like an amateur. He flowed into it with the fluid precision of someone who performed similar maneuvers under actual enemy fire in places where mistakes meant death rather than just training accidents. Johnson was conscious, but losing blood from a leg wound that had nicked his femoral artery. Mitchell's hands moved with medical precision that spoke of extensive battlefield experience, applying direct pressure while simultaneously assessing the wound severity and calculating time, the critical blood loss. "Easy, Marine," he said to Johnson, his voice carrying the calm authority that comes from having treated serious wounds under fire. "You're going to be fine, but I need you to stay still and let me work." His hands never stopped moving as he spoke, fashioning a tourniquet from his belt with practiced efficiency. "Patterson, Williams." Mitchell's voice snapped the two terrified recruits back to awareness. "Listen to me very carefully. We're going to extract from this position in 30 seconds. Patterson, you're going to carry Johnson. Williams, you're rear security. Watch our six and be ready to move when I give a word. This is not a drill. This is not training. This is real combat medicine and real tactical movement." "Copy." Both recruits nodded, something in Mitchell's tone cutting through their panic and replacing it with focused determination. But Mitchell wasn't finished demonstrating capabilities that no civilian contractor should possess. "Thompson," he called out to the drill instructor, his voice carrying across the range with battlefield volume. "Kill main power to Sector 7. That'll shut down the hydraulic system, feeding the target malfunctions." Thompson hesitated for a critical second. Contractors didn't give tactical orders to Marine drill instructors, but something in Mitchell's tone made argument impossible. This wasn't a suggestion from an observer. This was a command from someone who clearly understood the technical systems involved. As Thompson signaled frantically to the range control booth, Mitchell began orchestrating the extraction with textbook precision. He moved first, drawing any potential fire while the recruits followed in perfect tactical formation, Patterson supporting the wounded Johnson, Williams maintaining rear security, all three moving when Mitchell moved and stopping when he stopped. Their movement was flawless, not because the recruits had suddenly become expert infantrymen, but because Mitchell was directing them with a kind of tactical expertise that made complex maneuvers seem simple. The extraction took less than 30 seconds from initiation to completion. They reached the safety zone as medical personnel were already responding to the emergency. Johnson's wound properly stabilized and his bleeding controlled. But the most striking thing wasn't the successful rescue, it was Mitchell himself. As the adrenaline of the situation began to fade, he stood quietly among the chaos, breathing controlled, heart rate stable, showing none of the stress reactions that had the experienced drill instructor's hand shaking. Staff Sergeant Thompson found himself staring at Jay. Mitchell with completely new eyes. This wasn't a lucky civilian who'd risen to the occasion. This was someone who'd done this before, many times before, in places where the stakes were far higher than a training accident. The man's bearing had fundamentally changed. The soft contractor facade had been stripped away to reveal something that made Thompson's combat-experienced instinct stand at attention. Thompson made a decision that would change everything at Paris Island. He walked directly to the administrative office and demanded Mitchell's complete personnel file. What he found would explain everything and raise questions that would take hours to answer. Staff Sergeant Thompson stared at the personnel file, reading and rereading the limited information that wasn't buried under classification stamps. J. Mitchell classification, civilian contractor, retired. Previous service, U.S. Navy specialty. Classified, years of service. 30 deployment history, classified. Combat decorations, classified. Within an hour, Colonel Harrison arrived personally, something that never happened for routine training incidents. The colonel's grim expression as he reviewed Mitchell's file told Thompson everything he needed to know. Staff Sergeant, Colonel Harrison said quietly, what I'm about to tell you is not to leave this office without my explicit authorization. Clear. Thompson nodded, realizing he was about to learn exactly who they'd been dismissing as a soft desk jockey. Colonel Harrison walked directly to where Mitchell sat completing his incident report. Senior Chief Mitchell, the colonel said, using a rank that made every Marine within earshot snap to attention. I think it's time we dispense with the cover story and had a proper conversation. Mitchell looked up from his paperwork, and for the first time since anyone had known him, he smiled, not the polite contractor's expression, but the quiet confidence of a warrior among warriors. I was wondering when someone would put the pieces together, sir, he replied, his voice carrying decades of command authority that had been hidden beneath civilian courtesy. 30 years Navy. SEAL Team 6 for 8 years. Primary instructor at BUD/S for 6 years. Silver Star, Bronze Star with V device, Purple Hearts. Colonel Harrison announced. Thompson felt his worldview shifting with each revelation. This wasn't just any retired SEAL. This was James Ghost Mitchell, a legend whose exploits were still taught in special operations schools worldwide. The question, Senior Chief, Colonel Harrison continued, is what one of the Navy's most decorated warriors is doing pretending to be a civilian contractor at Marine Corps boot camp. Mitchell's smile widened. Research and development, sir. I'm writing new training protocols for a joint service program. Figured I'd get more honest assessment if people didn't know who I was. Thompson approached slowly, his mind reeling. Senior Chief, he said, his voice carrying genuine respect for the first time, I owe you an apology. We all do. Mitchell shook his head. No apology necessary, Staff Sergeant. You treated me with professional courtesy throughout. But those recruits who nearly died today, that's something we need to address systematically. Within a week, everything at Paris Island had changed. Senior Chief Mitchell transitioned from anonymous observer to senior tactical advisor, his recommendations reshaping training protocols that had been unchanged for decades. The morning after his identity was revealed, he stood before Thompson's recruits in his dress blue uniform, ribbons and decorations commanding instant respect. What happened during that emergency wasn't luck, Mitchell told them, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd trained thousands of warriors. It was proper tactical thinking, medical training, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. These skills aren't just for special operations. They're for every Marine who might find themselves in harm's way. The changes Mitchell implemented were profound. Equipment inspections became more thorough, following procedures he developed in combat zones. Communication protocols were refined using lessons from real operations where split-second decisions meant life or death. Most importantly, psychological training evolved to include stress inoculation techniques proven in actual combat. Thompson found himself learning alongside his recruits. You're a good instructor, Staff Sergeant, Mitchell told him one afternoon, but you're teaching them to pass tests. I'm teaching them to survive wars. There's a difference. The distinction was crucial, academic knowledge versus wisdom earned through sacrifice. 6 months later, Mitchell's protocols had spread throughout Marine Corps Training Command. Recruits showed markedly better performance in advanced schools, their tactical thinking sharper, emergency responses more controlled. Recruit Johnson, whose life Mitchell had saved, graduated first in his class and requested force recon assignment. inspired by the quiet professional who'd appeared from nowhere. As Mitchell prepared to complete his assignment, Colonel Harrison presented him with an honorary drill instructor's campaign cover, signed by every Marine who'd served under his guidance. "Senior Chief," the colonel said, "you came here unknown and unrecognized. You leave having changed how we prepare Marines for combat. That's the mark of a true warrior, making everyone around you better." Mitchell accepted the honor with characteristic humility, satisfied that he had revolutionized training methods and taught an entire installation that expertise often comes in unexpected packages.